Most people will never actually heal, even though they're doing all the right things. If that feels confronting, stay with me. I'm not going anywhere because this isn't about blame and it's not about doing any more, and it's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's not at all about being broken. It's about the way healing has been taught and the part that quietly gets missed. I see this all the time in my practice and in my school. People who've done years of healing, people who understand their patterns, people who can articulate their wounds really clearly and have very clear stories. And yet when life tightens, when relationships activate them, when stress hits, they're right back where they started. And the question that usually follows is, what's wrong with me? Well, it's nothing. There's nothing wrong with you. What's happening instead is that healing has stayed intellectual, but it hasn't fully landed in the body. And today I want to talk about why that happens and why it's far more common than people think. And also I want to talk about how this actually allows healing to stick if you do it the right way. Join me on the inside and I'll take you through it.
You're listening to the Intuitive Mastery Podcast. Hi, I'm Kate Connolly, and with over 15 years of intuitive healing and teaching experience, I'm here to help you celebrate intuition and value authenticity to create a world where you have the freedom to live your best life. This podcast is here to teach you how to apply the principles of spirituality, healing, and mindset to have true and lasting joy, all from the inside out. This is the Intuitive Mastery Podcast.
Hi and welcome. I am Kate and I run an intuitive mastery school, which is a really safe place for people to learn and understand themselves more deeply. They might want to do more healing work, dive into intuitive practices, learn how to code and bring in new forms of reality for yourself. I do all of this in live classes every week, where we all just gather and we learn new stuff, and I channel meditations and we just go through this journey together. If you're interested, the link will be below, and I look forward to seeing you in there if you want to join us. Look, today I wanted to talk about this concept, and it came to me through a couple of sessions that I've had recently with people, but also just with a little bit of insight into myself and my own healing journey. And it's this concept of why healing feels so hard and why we often find it extremely difficult to do. And here's the thing. We live in a culture that values insight. We want understanding. We want awareness. We want language. We want meaning. We want to put all of this very left-brained information into our experience so we can understand it better, so we can justify things, so we can put a label on it, so we can find a way in to understand things. And I do really sometimes agree with doing that as a practice, because understanding and awareness are such important parts of any kind of healing process. They really matter in terms of understanding yourself better and gaining a level of self-acceptance that you may not have had without it. So I'm definitely not against this. But insight alone doesn't change the nervous system, and it doesn't heal anything. Talking with someone about what's happening in your life can sometimes absolutely create spontaneous healing, but honestly, it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare that you're going to have that kind of experience from just talking about something and gaining an understanding. It can help change your path. It can help bring awareness, and it can help bring in more self-acceptance and acceptance of others. And that is really powerful. Absolutely. but it doesn't actually change the process of your life. It doesn't change your body. It doesn't change your behavior when it counts, although sometimes it may. But when you go back into your own kind of patterns of behavior, which are more unconscious, you're going to still exhibit the same behavior. You're still going to have the same reactive responses to things. And what I find really interesting about that is that you can have a profound realization about yourself and your life and how you function in it, but still feel really dysregulated in everyday life, right? So healing becomes something that you know about rather than something that you live from. So it becomes an intellectual concept, and often those intellectual concepts live outside of ourselves rather than a lived experience inside. And that is the difference between knowing and healing, right? This gap exists. And when it does, people usually respond in one of two ways. They either push harder, they do more work, more techniques, more fixing, they push, or they give up and they go, do you know what? This is as good as we're going to get. Like, this is as good as we're going to be, right? We're not going to get any better than this. Neither of those responses are actually necessary to the process of healing. We don't need to have full understanding and comprehension of something to be able to heal it. I know that sounds really counterintuitive and it may, really trigger something, and I totally hear you and I get that. And I'm a massive desirer of understanding. My intellectual mind is strong and it wants to understand and it wants to justify and find threads and causes and all of these things. And sometimes that isn't how we heal. Very often we need to go through other processes and other experiences to be able to go into a full place of healing. The thing is, the body was never meant to heal through efforting, even though, it is really important to place emphasis and intention on your healing. It is really important for that. But it doesn't actually, efforting more on something doesn't always mean that things will get better. When your body is really tired or there's a lot of cortisol in your body, doing more doesn't help. You have to rest. You actually have to stop. And that's how you heal. When you have really swollen feet, unless you lie down and put your feet up, the chances of them getting better is really slim. If you're studying really hard and your brain starts frying, if you don't stop studying, it's not going to get any better. You could keep trying to junk it up with caffeine or sugar or whatever else, but it's not actually going to get you to your study goal, and you're probably not going to take that information in anyway. So it's this really fascinating experience that we as humans have, which is understanding that, there's something I need to work from, something I need to understand about myself and work through and heal. But what do I do about that? And the only tool that we often have is trying to create a story and understanding around something rather than actually choosing to fully embody that process. And I'll explain that in a minute. When we actually heal, the process goes from recognition and understanding and into a completed state, so that we don't have recurring thoughts about something anymore. We don't have recurring emotions around whatever it is that we're having recurring emotions around. So that might be, if we use school for an example, or work, if we have a stressful experience and there's a person or an event, public speaking, whatever it might be, that brings anxiety, the only way to heal that anxiety, or the only way we know it's healed, is when we go to public speak again and we don't have that anxiety anymore, or we have it way less, or it's particularly manageable. And that's when we know it's been healed, because we can do it without freezing and getting stuck and going to deep emotional kind of reactivity. So we need to have that understanding that healing work, or when we choose to kind of move through something, we're only going to know that it's different if we don't have a trigger or a reaction to it anymore. And if we do, it's not done. There's more to be done. So experiences, they don't stay stuck because they were intense, right? They stay stuck because the body never got to fully register them, okay? And we often forget that when we have traumatic experiences, when we have big things that happen in our life or even small things, they will have a bodily reaction. Our body will respond to that. And I'm a full believer that every physical malady that we have has an emotional source to it. There is a reason, there is a cause, there is a belief or an experience or a trauma that's trapped energy in the body and created dysfunction. This is how we get unwell. This is how we get really sick. This is how we go into chronic illness, when we have that stuck experience in our bodies. And when we don't register that, when we don't see it for what it really is, the system will stay alert, right? And it's not because it's broken necessarily, it's because it's unfinished. It means that we haven't actually seen and honored and healed that experience. And so it kind of stays stuck in the body. And it's kind of why people say things like, I understand it, but it still affects me, right? I've processed it, but my body reacts anyway. I've done healings on it, but I still don't feel differently and nothing's changed, right? So this is when we know that we haven't fully met that experience. That's just our physiology speaking as well. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you, and it doesn't mean that you've done all the wrong things, like not at all. It just means that that part of your body or that part of your lived experience hasn't been fully met yet. And this is where we can actually start to really do things differently in our healing processes. So most of what we do normally when we intellectualize something, it still stays as kind of like a concept out in our mental body. It's not even in our body. When we understand an intellectual concept, it's not even something that's within us. It's something that's kind of sitting outside of us in our auric field. And most healing spaces, even very good ones, they focus on the story and the meaning and the insight and the interpretation, all of which are extremely important. I offer these in my one-on-one sessions. All of that information is really important, but the body doesn't speak in story. We still have to meet it in the body. We still have to actually work through the body, okay? The body speaks in sensation. It speaks in state. It speaks in subtle shifts of activation or collapse. And we can feel this. We feel this when someone walks in a room and we light up, or if we have a disappointment and our whole body shrinks and everything gets tighter and harder and more painful, right? And the body, if it doesn't have language for what it's experiencing, it can't release it. So instead of completion, you get management. I'll just manage it. My back is sore, but I'll just manage it. I'll put ice on it. I'll get it adjusted. I'll get a massage. I'll walk it out. I'll do yoga, whatever it is. But that's management. It's not healing. You're not completing anything. You're just band-aiding. And then you kind of spend your life, rather than integrating experiences, you spend your life coping with all of the stuff that goes unprocessed and untreated and unseen. So when we have this invisible gap between the two, we're starting to look at a whole new way of looking at things, and that is internal recognition. And it's the part that's quietly missing for most people. That internal recognition is this ability to step out of the story and feel what's going on. And what I find really fascinating about this is that even people who have been healers themselves, who treat people for a long time, even if you've been in a place of being the recipient of healing for a really long time, we often find it extremely difficult to recognize what's happening internally, even as it's happening or well past it's happened, okay? And it's not about being dramatic and making a big deal out of everything and kind of, holding your heart and staggering when someone says something bad, although maybe you need to. It's about noticing your body, noticing when the body tightens, noticing when something drops or goes flat. It's noticing when energy spikes or when you feel disconnected. And then most importantly around that is then getting really curious about that sensation. And when you don't know how you feel, when you don't know what you're looking at, I believe you, because these things can be hard. But what's going to be sitting inside those contractions or those tightnesses or those pains in the body is going to be emotions, beliefs, and stories. And those emotions, beliefs, and stories are absolutely necessary to be connected with before they get released. And primarily, it's the understanding and the recognition of emotion and what's happening there. I have literally had 2 people in the last week, one of whom is a healer, one of whom is a healee, and both of them, when they were asked to connect in with a part of their body and asked to tune into what they were feeling, had absolutely no idea. No idea. And that's okay, because this is part of shifting that belief and that story around understanding the concept and embodying the experience. And when we get invited to check in with our body, where do we feel that contraction? Where do we feel that tightness? Where is our body talking to us? We're not trying to shift a physical issue. We're actually trying to tune in and understand what it's telling us. So if you are someone who doesn't have a lot of emotional language, that can be really difficult. And it is something that takes a bit of time to understand and experience. Firstly, you can just start with a body sensation. Okay. So when I am talking about, I don't know, my fear of public speaking, where do I feel that in my body? If I'm speaking about public speaking and I have a contraction somewhere, if I have a bit of a tightness or does something feel heavy or collapsed, what exactly is that sensation? Number one. And number two, where exactly is that sensation? So when we can connect into what and where, then we get really honed in to our body and how it's responding to something. And then when we really connect in with it, we can then ask, what emotion is sitting in this experience? And usually that answer will come quite quickly for people who have done this for a really long time. And for other people, they need to sit down and explore and start working with emotional language. Start with basics: happy, sad, angry, frustrated, annoyed, confused, worried, anxious, like some of the real basic emotions. And start to kind of see if any of those resonate with the feeling in your body, the what and the where. And the why is the emotion. And once we kind of start to understand the emotion, then we have the portal into the healing. Then we can actually do something about it. And we can actually meet it where it's at, send compassion to that energy, to that emotion. We can send compassion if we have a remembrance of an experience. We can send love, forgiveness, and oneness and compassion to the version of us that had that experience. If a memory comes up, we don't dismiss the memories. We don't dismiss the feelings. We don't shut anything down. Everything is game in this particular section of a healing process, because what's coming up is relevant, even if it feels completely left of field, completely random, completely not, what you had thought would come up, right? And if you can see, we've started from public speaking, we've gone to a body part, and then we've gone to an emotion, which may be completely and totally and utterly unrelated to the public speaking. Can you see how that is something that can't be intellectualized? You can't make a story about that. That is just an experience, and that experience needs to be met. And if you don't meet the experience, you cannot possibly hope to shift it and heal it in its entirety. Okay, you're still going to be band-aiding on some level. Okay, so you can ask yourself a question: what am I actually feeling right now? Right? Am I feeling tight, angry? Is there a part of my body that's speaking up? And how does it feel? Like, what's actually coming up? Right? Once we start to understand and go into that emotion, then we have all of the tools that we need to start healing it. Like I said, with the compassion, or sending it love, or talking to it, having a conversation with it, and allowing it to kind of dissolve. And this is part of what we call embodied healing, which is, I really think, a massive, massive part of this. And why I think this is a missing skill is because we are, as humans and society, taught to shut our feelings down. Okay. It is a foundational skill to understand our experience, to understand our feelings, to feel in our bodies what's happening in any particular moment, because this becomes our guide. How our body responds to something becomes the basis of our intuitive knowing and understanding. And if we ignore our body most of the time, how do we have any chance of understanding it enough to heal it? And not understanding in a conceptual way, but understanding it from an awareness of, yes, every time I do this, I get this contraction through here, wherever it is, in my shoulder, in my back, and I'm going to just feel into that contraction, and I'm going to feel the emotion that's sitting there. Trust what comes through. It might be something completely random, but if it feels true to you, it will be true to you. And then usually, and this is what I find, there's almost always more than one emotion. You're going to clear one, and then there'll be another, and then you'll clear that, then there'll be another, and then you'll clear that, and then there'll be another. And there's usually probably 4 or 5 or 6 at least in any one particular body area. And it's just a case of practicing that, or using a practitioner to work through that with you if they know embodied healing practices. I feel like sensitive people, intuitive people, people who have learned early to function, cope, or stay focused, they can very much choose to block that out. But the universe does speak quite loudly, and it is pretty hard to avoid it after a long time. Okay. So I'm just curious in terms of how people are showing up in their lives. If people want to share any comments, or kind of send in any anecdotes for themselves around this concept of intellectualizing versus really allowing yourself to emotionally understand and process something. Now, when you do get through those emotional awarenesses, there can be a lot of resistance that shows up as well. So number one, we don't recognize the changes in our bodies. So this is when we get curious. Number two, we don't know how to note and name the emotion that we're experiencing there, or we refuse to try and see or feel where that experience is coming from, right? And then even if we get there, even if we get all the way to this place, sometimes it's really, really scary to even send compassion and healing and try and release it from our bodies. And there's always going to be, I find particularly, enormous resistance just before you're about to hit a really amazing breakthrough. So if you find this process really silly and pretty frustrating and dumb, I hear you, I've been there. Try it anyway. Just see, there's nothing to lose. If you want to do it with a seasoned practitioner, absolutely do that as well. There are so many people out there that do healings around embodied experiences. There are different chiropractors out there. We do it in the Intuitive Mastery School. I do it in my one-on-ones. There are going to be somatic practitioners out there all over the place. And you will find somebody, if you're ready and if you're calling it in, to help you with this process, because it is such a powerful thing to do. But at home, you can start by literally getting curious about your body. You might want to ask yourself multiple times per day, how am I feeling right now? Like, what emotion is coming up for me? What, if I'm feeling really tired, for example, where am I feeling that tiredness in my body? Oh, I feel it in my shoulder. Okay, great. What emotion is sitting in my shoulder? And start getting curious. I used to, when I was doing one of my techniques, my emotional techniques years ago, we would have cards full of different possible emotions. I think there were probably 500 different emotional states in there. And even just by working through those, it was really amazing to just kind of expand my emotional capacity and expand my emotional language so I could understand in more depth and in more detail what I was actually feeling in there. And it is actually a really fantastic process to actually get really curious and then actually start to explore. And there's usually a core 10 to 20 different emotions, but it could be anything. You don't have to limit yourself in any way here. But understanding and feeling and knowing and then sending healing and love and compassion to the part of you that's feeling that emotion, that's powerful. And that is the difference. When we allow ourselves to then process emotions, so if it does bring up emotions, if we need to cry or yell or get angry or stamp our feet or be frustrated, that is also a really powerful portal into that healing process. And if we don't get curious and if we don't start exploring that embodied experience, I think we're missing an entire massive piece of the puzzle of deep and true healing. So I hope that was pretty helpful. I know it feels, hopefully it's not too overwhelming. Just get curious and just start to understand that our bodies keep the score, and learning how to tune into and understand it and then start to dive into those possibilities is the key between band-aiding and properly processing and healing something. All right. I hope that was good. Sending so much love to you and yours. If you want to join us in the school, you're welcome. And otherwise, I will see you next time.